welcome back to a very special episode of App Stories. Today's show is brought to you by our iOS and iPadOS 17 sponsor, that's SetApp, as well as Things, Daylight, HelloFresh, and Electric. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hey, Ticci.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing great. How does it feel to have the review finished, Federico?
Well, like every year, it feels very good to be done. I'm happy to put this out there. I talked about the making of and sort of behind the scenes in the pre-show for App Stories Plus members.
Yep.
It's been a journey, as always. I took a different approach this year. I did the whole thing in 20 days. That was my goal. And hopefully by the time this episode comes out, that the review is actually done. As you can imagine, we are recording these days before the review is actually done. John has read the whole thing and put together, because I am so attached to this project now. I don't even know what I want to talk about anymore. I've reached a point, like every year, where I think that everything sucks. Hopefully, it doesn't suck. But when you get too close to a project that you've been thinking about and working on for a long time, it's hard to have an objective discussion about it. So thankfully, there's you who just read the whole thing. But I should say, before we dive into the topics, like every year, there's going to be extras for the review. There's an ebook version that every single club member can get. There's 2 Obsidian plugins that are exclusive for Club MacStories Plus and Premier members. There's going to be details for these plugins on MacStories. I talked about that more at length in App Stories Plus. Those 2 plugins are incredible if you work with Markdown in Obsidian. And also in App Stories Plus, there's a whole making of section about the review. And there's going to be a making of sort of behind the scenes from Michael Stieber in MacStories Weekly, because Michael really, once again, outdid himself with the intro animation for the review and all the chapter images for the review. We took a different there's a different rationale and different style for the chapter images this year. So you can read more about this in MacStories Weekly this Friday. And maybe I'll put together something extra for Weekly as well. We'll see. That being said, there's going to be details for all of these extras to get the full review media experience. There's going to be details on MacStories. Now let's talk about the review. Where do you want to start?
All right. Well, before we do that, I got to tell you, Federico, it is always a huge pleasure to read your review. It is. And it's entertaining, but also very informative. And I always end up, even though I'm about as close to these betas as anyone, I always learn something from your reviews that I didn't catch myself during the summer. So great job on the review this year. And,
Thank you.
It's for me, it's a lot of fun watching you work too, even though it's from a distance and over iMessage mainly. It's very cool to see your process and then really listen to it during the making of that we did in the Plus segment, because I think that even though it's very specific to what you do and what you're creating, there's a lot of lessons that could be learned there for anybody who's working on writing as well as working in Obsidian. So great job with that, and it's been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
This episode of App Stories and Federico's iOS and iPadOS 17 review are brought to you by SetApp. SetApp is the first app subscription service for macOS and iOS apps, developed in-house by the MacPod team and released in 2017. I can't believe it's been 6 years. SetApp is a great, efficient way to discover apps for every professional with a Mac or an iPhone. Whether you design or develop software, or you just want a solid tool to edit a photo, SetApp has over 240 apps to choose from. It's a great value, too. Instead of paying for separate licenses, there's just one flat monthly fee. A dedicated curation team only selects the highest quality apps, too. New apps are added all the time, and updates are free. And all apps are full-featured pro versions of the apps with no ads. There are a bunch of features that make SetApp stand out. One of my favorites is the curated app collections, which are hand-picked by the people at MacPaw, so you can quickly find what you want and get back to work. The app collections are really diverse. It includes everything from renowned apps like Clean My Mac X, Ulysses, and PDF Expert, along with niche-specific tools that cater to a broad range of professional, educational, and creative needs. There's even AI enhanced functionality with a new feature that was introduced not that long ago that enhances app discovery and interaction. These AI-powered features enable more accurate app recommendations and assist users in getting the most out of SetApp's extensive collection. Head on over to setapp.com to try SetApp free for a week. And if you like what you see, pay just $9.99 per month for as long as SetApp is useful to you. Again, that URL is setapp.com to start a 1-week free trial of SetApp. We'll have a link in the show notes too. Our thanks to SetApp for the support of the show and for sponsoring Federico's iOS and iPadOS 17 review this year. Federico, there's a lot of ground to cover here, and there's more ground to cover than we could even do in a single episode, even though this is going to be a bit of a long one. And so I've really gone through and picked some of the highlights that I want to talk to you about. We will definitely come back to some of these topics over the coming weeks. I mean, this is really the fuel for App Stories for quite a while. And that includes, I'm sure we'll do an episode on third-party widgets at some point, but I think you and I have a list of 40 plus widgets that we've been working with and trying, and it's just too much to include that in this episode. But I want to start with iPadOS 17 because this is a fairly small update, but it's also a significant update because it really fixes a lot of the problems with Stage Manager for last year and introduces lock screen widgets. What do you have to say about iPadOS 17, TG?
It undoes a lot of the damage. It undoes a lot of the damage from last year. So my takeaway about iPadOS 17 is that it's not like, do not expect a miracle, right? It's not like Apple has completely scrapped Stage Manager or redesigned the whole thing. They have taken a very deliberate approach. And I know this in talking to people who actually work on Stage Manager. And I can tell you, and App Stories listeners, with confidence, that Apple is maybe doing what they didn't do last summer with the beta cycle. They're actually listening to feedback and they're going through those feedback items, item by item, feature by feature, design change by design change. And with iPadOS 17, my understanding is that we've only seen sort of a first batch of these updates to fix and improve what didn't work with Stage Manager last year. And from conversations that I've had privately at WWDC, I think my understanding, obviously, people who work at Apple don't tell you in these exact terms. But my understanding is that, all the criticism, not just from me, but from other creators like Christopher Lawley, for example, other people who have complained about Stage Manager, it was truly a wake-up call for a lot of people at Apple. And what I like about iPadOS 17 is that, Apple had the humility to listen, understand, and start changing some pretty fundamental aspects of Stage Manager. For example, now you have much more flexible window positioning. That was advertised as one of the key principles of Stage Manager last year. You don't need to worry about positioning your windows. We're going to do it for you. Except that power users complained because Stage Manager was a little too aggressive in positioning windows where it thought they were supposed to be. And I, as a power user, thought, well, no, I want to control where my windows go. And so now in iPadOS 17, there's a much better balance between Stage Manager trying to be helpful and you saying, well, no, this window is supposed to be here, and it stays there when you do. There's a much better support for external displays, right? So now you can make a window as small or as big as you want, put it in a corner of the display, and it stays there. Stage Manager doesn't try to center the window every single time. External displays now fully support remembering your window layouts and your window positions.
Yeah, that's great.
And iPadOS does so by actually remembering how you want to use a window on the iPad's internal display versus how you want to use a window on an external display. And it remembers that configuration. So when my iPad is connected to my studio display, I can make the Apple Music window big. But when the USB-C cable is detached from my iPad Pro, the music window can be small on the iPad. And when I reattach the cable again, Stage Manager remembers, well, you wanted the music one to be big on the display. I'm gonna restore that setting. So that's really well done. So there's a lot of these Stage Manager fixes that are maybe hard to quantify, but they're there, and they make they really do make an impact in terms of how you can work with Windows on an iPad.
I want to interrupt you just for a second, Federico, because I will tell you that you're right. While these Stage Manager features aren't perfect, they go a very long way, because I completely abandoned Stage Manager on the iPad during the summer last year, and I'm back on it full time, because it really is, for me, it's at a point now where while there are things I'd like it to do that it doesn't, it's usable now.
Yeah, exactly. And I've been using it the whole summer. Haven't looked back. Haven't returned to non-Stage Manager iPad multitasking at all. There are still limitations that I cover in my review. I don't think it's useful to go through the list of problems again. But my understanding is that Apple is listening and they're working on it. And the other, iPadOS 17, what else is there? Interactive widgets, but obviously we're going to talk about that in the context of iOS 2. And of course, following the same playbook of iOS 14 and iOS 15 or iPadOS 15, bringing those iOS 14 widgets to the iPad home screen. Now we have those iOS 16 lock screen widgets now on the iPadOS 17 lock screen too. And I like what Apple's done here because they didn't just say, well, you can put your widgets under the clock, which is the case when you use your iPad in portrait. But an iPad in landscape on iPadOS 17 has a brand new widget sidebar on the lock screen where you can get all these widgets that you want to use. There you can put, I believe, maybe 15, 20 of the small ones, and obviously fewer than of the medium ones and the big ones, which is a new format. But you can put a lot of widgets there. And those widgets now, lock screen widgets, are also interactive. So whether you want to start a timer or mark a reminder as done, or play some music, now you can do that on the iPad lock screen. The only downside that I mentioned in my review is that I'm not so sold on the iPad lock screen as a place for widgets, if only because the iPad doesn't have an always-on display. And the lock screen on my iPad, because it doesn't have an always-on mode, it's just not something where I hang out. It's not a place that I see a lot of the time. Most of the time, I just sit down in front of my iPad Pro, press the space bar, and it unlocks, and I'm good to work. Whereas the iPhone, the always-on display, always puts those widgets right there. But we'll see. Maybe it's something that will grow on me, and I'm sure if the iPad ever gets an always-on mode, I will use those lock screen widgets more.
Yeah, I have to believe that this is a precursor to having an always-on screen on the iPad in the future. But I will say that one place that I find it really useful isn't on the lock screen, but on the notification screen, because I use my iPad Pro, right? I use it in universal control a lot while I'm working on my Mac. And it's handy to be able to see the widgets on my home screen on my iPad. But sometimes I'm kind of going into a more focused writing mode, and I have Obsidian open on my Mac in full screen, and all I want to see is that. But I can pull down the notification screen on the iPad and still see things like the weather or the time or whether my battery's about to run out on my AirPods, whatever it happens to be, without it being quite as distracting as looking at colorful widgets on my home screen.
Yeah.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by the award-winning to-do app, Things. Things has just been updated with one of the most requested features, adjustable text size. This means you can now scale Things interface to the size that's right for you. Whether you want to shrink your text to fit a small iPhone or jack up the size on a 30-inch display, Things gives you the control you need. Of course, it's not only the text that changes size. Things now uses vector graphics for all of its icons, and the layout has been finely tuned so that everything scales together beautifully. Things is also releasing some great features for Apple's new operating systems. New interactive widgets that allow you to complete to-dos directly from the home screen. New widgets for the iPhone standby feature, and watchOS 10 Smart Stack. And Things also provides widgets for the iPad's lock screen and for the Mac's desktop on macOS Sonoma. Things is one of those apps that's always on the cutting edge when it comes to new system features, and this year's no different. Download Things today to try the very latest improvements on all of your devices. Just head on over to the website, things.app. Learn more about the app's great features and download a free trial for your Mac. Of course, you'll also find it on the App Store just by searching for Things. Whatever it is you want to accomplish in life, Things can help you get there. Try Things today at things.app. You won't regret it. All right, Federico, let's dig into iOS 17 because I really want to spend a good chunk of time talking to you about widgets and Standby, both how they work and the kind of things that they're capable of.
So in iOS 17, there's a couple of things. There's a couple of themes, I think, that we should talk about. The first one being widget interactivity. All widgets are interactive everywhere. On the home screen, on the lock screen, live activities are also interactive now. And I mention live activities because they are built with the same technology as widgets. And there's the brand new Standby mode, which puts widgets available to you in this kind of smart speaker-like design where you're using your iPhone on a charger and you can look up useful information, sort of like an Amazon Echo Show. Imagine if it was a HomePod with screen, this is what it would look like. And widgets being interactive, Apple, being Apple, shouldn't be surprising that it's not like you can now have a widget that is like an app window, a full-on app window. You cannot have widgets that bring up the software keyboard. You cannot scroll inside widgets. You cannot perform multi-touch gestures inside widgets. Instead, interactivity is very limited and very simple. You can have buttons and toggles in widgets. You can just press something in a widget. And that, however, feels like too little, but it actually goes a long way toward making key functionalities of apps available to you no matter your context on an iPhone or iPad. The very basic example being now you can mark a reminder as done from the home screen instead of having to open the Reminders app. You can just perform a task right there on the home screen. There's the brand new home widgets that allow you to control any scene or accessory you want directly from the home screen. So it's all about these very simple actions that you can put right there on the home screen, on the lock screen, in Standby, in a live activity, and perform with a single tap. And those tasks, those actions are going to save you time because it means that in aggregate, you're going to launch apps, the main apps, a lot less than before. It used to be that, you could, you had to tap on a Reminders widget and you would be taken into the Reminders app. And then if you wanted to return to what you were doing, you had to manually close Reminders and go back. No more of that dance. But
right.
the second aspect, the second theme is widgets everywhere. And maybe we'll talk about this when we wrap up the episode. But I get the sense in testing iOS and iPadOS 17 that Apple fundamentally believes in widgets as this key interaction paradigm, as this new kind of app interaction that allows you to, no matter whether you're on the home screen or just looking at your iPhone's lock screen, or maybe your iPhone is charging next to you as it is right now for me, you can still get something done quickly thanks to widgets. And the fact that they are everywhere, including watchOS 10 and macOS Sonoma on the desktop, that should tell you a lot in terms of what Apple thinks about widgets.
Yeah, I really love the fact that the widgets are just such a nice lightweight interaction where the most common things that I do in a particular app, I have at my fingertips without having to open the app and then potentially getting distracted by something else. I mean, Reminders is a great example because it's very easy to go into Reminders and then start looking, oh, what do I have coming up tomorrow or the next day? Or, have I got anything in my inbox? It's easy to get distracted and lost in lists when you have a lot of them. And I just appreciate that I can set up the Reminders widget, for example, and see just a handful of things that I'm working on right now, because the reality is that's all I can get done at any one time anyway, and it helps keep me from getting too distracted.
Yeah. And the other thing is there's going to be so many widgets to choose from.
Oh, yeah.
We already start seeing as we are recording this, we're recording this on Thursday, the week before iOS 17 comes out. And we already start seeing the first iOS 17 app updates with interactive widgets. And the thing is, this is, we are living a scenario in which developers are following up to the work they did 3 years ago in iOS 14 for home screen widgets. And now it feels like Apple just, the other shoe dropped in a way, which is now all these widgets can also be interactive. And so that sort of, that gold rush, we're going to see it again, because now developers are coming up with all sorts of ideas. Some obvious names pop to mind, and I mentioned them in my review. Timery, for example, is an excellent widget, or actually suite of widgets that allow you to start and stop timers on the home screen. Widgetsmith is coming up with this incredible version 5 that, amongst other things, allows you to have a music collection widget that you can style as the old CoverFlow UI from the iPod days. You can have an interactive CoverFlow widget on your home screen, tap through different albums and playlists, and start playback from there, from the home screen. Another category of widgets that we'll see now, games, little games that you can play on your home screen. And sure, these are fun little gimmicks, but hey, I've been playing this game of tic-tac-toe on my home screen for the past few weeks, and it's fun.
Yeah.
It's a fun way to waste a couple minutes there.
Yeah, they're simple games. I mean, we've also seen like a tile game where you can move the tiles around. I think it's worth mentioning too the limitations of widgets, because some of the more experimental interactions you'll see as developers start releasing their widgets is that the interactions once in a while, with some of them that are really pushing the envelope, will seem a little off, because widgets can only do two things. They can act as buttons. Areas on the widget can act as a button, and you can use toggles. And that you cannot use swipe gestures is probably the biggest one that comes to mind.
Yeah, you cannot use those swipe gestures anywhere, unfortunately, because it's against the rules, and the system is not capable of that. Obviously, you gotta believe that will happen at some point in the future, but not now. And obviously there are still widgets that are gonna take you into the full app when you tap on them. But the general idea is that now a lot of these buttons that you would see in widgets before, and pressing those buttons took you into an app, now that button will do something right there on the home screen and the lock screen. We shouldn't forget that these widgets are also interactive on the lock screen. They are more simple from a visual perspective. They are monochrome. They're smaller, so they allow for fewer buttons on screen, but they are interactive. And they are interactive also in standby, which is one of my favorite features this year. We talked about standby before. We had a story on the site about our favorite standby chargers and accessories. Standby is effectively widgets and other things, including photos and clocks, but really widgets, Siri, and notifications on a type of device, on a type of experience, I guess, that makes something boring, which is charging your phone, into something that is actually useful and that can serve a purpose instead of having just, a brick of glass charging on a stand. Now it can do something for you. And those widgets are also interactive. So once again, play music, pause music, play a podcast, control your home accessories. All sorts of interactions are now possible when the phone is doing nothing. You can just press and something happens.
The thing about standby for me is, and the reason I know that it's as good as it is that sometimes I forget that thing sitting in that charger is my phone. That I think, I want to check something on my iPhone, and like, where's my iPhone? And then I'm like, now I have to get out of standby mode, because I actually kind of like having those photos there and things. And it's not hard to put it back in standby mode, but it really just kind of transforms your iPhone into a completely different type of device that you interact with differently and think of differently, at least in my case.
It really does. It really does. So widgets, definitely the highlight for me this year. They are everywhere in the review, in the chapter images. You'll see them in a bunch of places. And it's definitely the highlight in terms of functionality on iOS this year.
Regain control of your business with Daylight. One of the biggest challenges small business owners face is the lack of time. As your business grows, you struggle to stay on top of the increasing demands. I know I've certainly felt like that before. There are prospects to follow up on, sales to track, and commitments that you've promised to deliver to your clients on a daily basis. It's easy to feel overwhelmed and fear that your business will fail if you can't keep up. Before long, and without even realizing it, you're feeling burned out and you've lost the passion and drive that you used to feel. But it doesn't have to be that way, because Daylight can help you regain control of your business. Daylight was made with small business owners in mind to reduce the time it takes to manage clients, sales, and projects. The app is exclusively for your Mac, iPhone, and iPad, and it will help you manage your business efficiently so you can have more freedom to do what you love. Regain control of your business and free up your time with Daylight. Go to marketcircle.com to learn more. Again, that URL to check out Daylight is marketcircle.com. Our thanks to Daylight for their support of the show. Okay, Federico, we have a bunch of system apps that you've covered in your review, and we're not going to cover all of them, but we do need to touch on two of the biggest ones that have gotten the most updates and I think are really turning into the premier apps among the ones that come automatically on your iPhone and iPad. And the first of those that I want to talk to you about is Reminders.
So reminders and notes are these fantastic examples of apps that have been really productized by Apple in the sense that every single year they get something new. And
Right.
What I find so impressive about both of them, but maybe especially so with Reminders, is that Apple is not afraid to take power user features and make them approachable by all kinds of users. We saw that initially years ago with smart lists and tagging, and now you can see that in iOS and iPadOS 17 with sections. You can create a section inside of a standard list in Reminders, just like you can do in Things and Todoist. Having subsections in a list or project, however you want to call it. It's very much a power user feature, or has been so far. But now Reminders can do it. You don't have to use it, but if you want to, it's there. But it's not just that. Those sections you can view vertically, as vertically stacked sections, or you can view them as columns. And you can basically turn Reminders into this Trello-like or Todoist-like Kanban board. Obviously, Apple doesn't call it Kanban. They call it columns. They call it column view. But it is incredible. And I've been using this a ton for my review. I had a bunch of sections like editing, writing, feedback. And I could just take a reminder, drag and drop it between columns. It works exceptionally well on the iPad because of the landscape orientation that I use my iPad Pro the most. It's perfect. It's everything I wanted Reminders to be. I never thought it would actually happen, but it did. And it works super well. The one thing that I pointed out in my review, and which I think Apple should maybe take a look at, right now, the today and scheduled views, which are arguably maybe the most popular views of Reminders, like, hey, I need to see what's due today and what's coming up.
Oh, yeah. For a lot of people, I think that's absolutely true.
Those lists, they offer these sort of legacy sections. In today, you have morning, afternoon, and evening. And in scheduled, you have the days of the week. But those are not the new kinds of sections. They are legacy sort of custom sections, which means, unfortunately, that you cannot turn your scheduled view into columns. You cannot have columns for days of the week, which I really wanted to have. Like, I've been doing this in
Same here.
I used to do that in Good Task or in Todoist. You cannot do that yet in Reminders because the schedule section and the today section, they have these old legacy view options that do not integrate with the new column mode. But otherwise, I mean, I continue to find Reminders so impressive. It's my task manager. I'm fully back on it. There are just so many advantages to using Reminders at this point, from the Apple Watch integration to the Siri integration, background sync. It works everywhere. It supports attachments, subtasks, tagging, smart lists, and now columns. It's kind of wild to consider all the power user functionalities that Apple put into Reminders.
Yeah, and what's amazing about it to me is that it scales incredibly well, because you can still just use it as a very, what it started as, which is just a very simple checklist, basically, right? I mean, you could just say, oh, I've got these 4 errands that I need to do today, and you put them in Reminders and you check them off as you go. But you can also do fairly complex project management in this too. And I think The other feature of reminders that's worth mentioning here is the new type of list, which is the grocery list, which when you set up that, there are now three kinds of lists and reminders. There are standard lists, there are grocery lists, and then there are smart lists. And grocery lists are, as you add items to the list, they're automatically categorized into standardized sections. So, you say buy oranges, and it'll go into a produce section, or you say buy cheese, and it'll go into a dairy section, or buy a pizza, frozen pizza, and it'll go into a frozen section. All that kind of thing, which makes it a lot easier when you get around to shopping, because most grocery stores are organized in a similar way. You'll be in a particular part of a store with a particular category of food, and so you'll have all those things together. And I think that this is kind of one of those features that's going to prompt a lot of people to get the people that they live with onto iOS 17 too, because I know, for instance, Jennifer's not on it. She adds something to our grocery list, and it works perfectly well, but it doesn't go into a category. It just goes kind of to the bottom of the list, I think it is, for me right now, because I'm on the beta and she's not. And the things that I put on the list go into sections, but just kind of appear as regular items in her iOS 16 list. So I'm definitely going to encourage her to get on the updated 17 as soon as she can on Monday.
We should talk about Apple Notes. We talked about this when the public beta came out in July. Obviously, just like with reminders, in Apple Notes, we can see Apple sort of borrowing a power user feature, which is internal links between notes, and turning that into a feature of the Notes app that millions of people use. So now in Notes, in iOS and iPadOS 17, just like you can do in Obsidian, Notion, Craft, and all this new generation of note-taking apps, you can create an internal link between notes to refer to, say, a trip itinerary or a table of contents if you're writing an essay or a story in Apple Notes. Just the ability to create these links and instantly navigate to other places of Apple Notes with a native link, it is an incredible feature. And obviously, it's not as advanced as what you may have seen in Obsidian, right? There's no backlinks. It doesn't work the other way around. It's not as complex as something like Chrome, but this is exactly how Apple operates. They take a power user feature and they say, well, what's the essence of this functionality? Why do people use it? Why do people love it? How can we make it approachable and understandable by millions of other people? Because it's easy, right? It's easy if you make Obsidian, if you're the maker of Obsidian, if you're the developer behind Rome Research, it's easy to talk to power users. They understand you. They understand complex apps. They want complex workflows. It's much harder. Just like, and I said this on MacStories before, but just like it is easier to write a lot and much harder to write less, it is easier to make power user features with all sorts of settings, and it is much harder to distill something down to its essence. And this is exactly what Apple does with Notes and Reminders.
Yeah, no, I'm really impressed with Notes. It's a fantastic app this year. And, it's been really solid for a long time. And I know you used it for some of your early research in the review. I think another notable thing worth mentioning is that there is now the ability to do block quotes in the app, as well as code blocks. So those are two new formatting features, which they look great. And, it's the kind of thing, you don't have syntax highlighting with the code, for instance, but it does do it in a monospace font where you're not going to end up with kind of weird stray characters if you then copy it out and try to put it into into a code editor or something like that, which is great. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by HelloFresh. With HelloFresh, you get farm-fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. Skip the trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. That's why it's America's #1 meal kit. When it comes to options, more just is more. That's why HelloFresh's menu includes 40 recipes and over 100 add-on items to choose from every single week. And when you get HelloFresh, you know you're getting top-notch produce. since it travels from the farm to your door in less than 7 days. I've really enjoyed using HelloFresh, and the variety really is part of the appeal because there's so many different recipes available, and they're both nutritious and easy to make. Plus, you have those recipe cards when you're done, and you can make them. You can either order again and get the same ingredients from HelloFresh, or use it with what you've got on hand and use it as a way to kind of increase your repertoire of recipes. It's really, really nice that way. Go on over to HelloFresh.com/50appstories and use 50 App Stories for 50% off plus 15% off for the next 2 months. That's all lowercase letters, HelloFresh.com/50 App Stories. That's the number 50 App Stories and the code 50 App Stories to get 50% off plus 15% off for the next 2 months. HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit. Our thanks to HelloFresh for their support of the show. Federico, one thing that you did in this year's review that I found very interesting, it's a new approach and a new direction for your reviews, which is a section on intelligence. And I guess explain why it is that you've created a standalone section called intelligence.
Yeah, so I've been covering Apple's intelligent features ever since Apple started doing, machine learning on device and the crowdsourced differential privacy years ago. I believe that was iOS 10 or something, maybe even 11. I guess I've been covering those intelligent features for a while, but obviously the broader landscape of machine learning, on-device processing, and artificial intelligence has rapidly changed around Apple. I mean, now, we have ChatGPT and Google making Bard and all this progress being made thanks to the recent innovation of large language models. We have Apple itself starting to publicly say we are working on, we are using this new transformer model for the keyboard. We are, developing a large language model. This entire landscape is changing, and it's changing quickly. And I thought that considering all the new features in the intelligence department this year in iOS and iPadOS, it was time to give it the proper, no pun intended, spotlight, which is one of the sections, but to put it front and center in the review. Also, because I feel like it's a good investment for the future, given that rumors are pointing to a much, much improved Siri based on a large language model coming out next year, and of course the Vision Pro and Vision OS. That is a platform entirely based on intelligent features and understanding your surroundings thanks to on-device processing. And given the scale of Apple's efforts and how how these features are integrated at a system level, whether it's the keyboard, Spotlight, Siri, information extracted from photos, the ability to take a photo and turn it into a sticker because the system knows what the subject of a photo is. All those features came together in this chapter that I thought it was time to debut this year in preparation for what's going to happen next year with the Vision Pro and potentially with Siri.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me because I think you're right. I think that one of the reasons we're starting to see this stuff accelerate on other devices, all these devices that we're reviewing both this year, is Vision Pro and the fact that when you're in a headset, you really need to rely on intelligence more than ever. And there are a whole bunch of ways this manifests itself across the system. And I think one of the most interesting ones to me, and we can laugh a little bit about some of the lookup results, but Spotlight's really an important one because Spotlight hasn't always been the best, but I think Spotlight on iOS and iPadOS this year has really, really moved forward.
I think so too, and it did so in a couple different ways. The first one being there's a new design, a lot more information shown at once when you're searching for something, a lot more relevant information shown to you when you use Spotlight, but also the new extremely relevant role of app shortcuts. App shortcuts, and now forgive me, but everything is called shortcuts. I know, it's not my fault.
Yeah.
Last year, app shortcuts were introduced as a way to ease people into using the Shortcuts app. They were these one-action shortcuts pre-made by developers, contained within their apps that users didn't have to create manually. You could just get started with an app shortcut to say order coffee from your favorite coffee shop, or I don't know, quickly start a timer or something, quickly capture a note. They were made by developers as an introduction to the Shortcuts app, so that they were pre-made, you could start using them, and then maybe if you wanted to, you could extend with the Shortcuts editor by dragging in different actions. But the key problem was, well, they were still kind of hidden in the Shortcuts app. And you still had that barrier of entry of people actually clicking the Shortcuts icon on the home screen. And I think Apple's approach this year is genius. When you're searching for an app in Spotlight, the result will be, the first result will be the app, the icon of the app you want to launch. But right next to the right side of the icon, and I believe if you're using a left to right language, it's on the left side, obviously. But on the right side of the icon, you will get a selection of the top app shortcuts for the app, so that those shortcuts are immediately shown to you. And so imagine if you're searching for Parcel, right? The delivery tracking app. You search for Parcel, you type PA in Spotlight, the Parcel icon comes up, and you're like, great, I want to launch Parcel. But then your eyes see, well, what's this, Steam Deck delivery shortcut next to it? That's an app shortcut that the developer pre-made, one of your upcoming deliveries. You can click on it from Spotlight and be taken directly into that delivery UI, that specific delivery UI. And I think this is genius, right? I think exposing app shortcuts this way, blending them with Spotlight on the iPhone and the iPad, putting them right next to the app results, I think is a great way to tell people, look, there's useful information here with these shortcuts, useful actions for you. Developers can now have a specific design for these app shortcuts. There's these tiles that they can design with custom colors, with custom symbols. Mm-hmm. They're really well done. They don't even look like Shortcuts app shortcuts anymore, but they are behind the scenes. And I think that's a really good decision. That's a really good decision on Apple's part.
Yeah, I think so too. And boy, what a journey this has been. I mean, we started how many years ago now with Siri shortcuts, which were essentially the same thing, but they were not discoverable because you had to know the magic language and speak them to Siri. And then they became app shortcuts, and app shortcuts lived kind of at the bottom of the Shortcuts app last year. And now we've actually got them in Spotlight right next to search results for the apps that you're looking for, making them both discoverable and just easy to use right out of the box with Spotlight if you've already figured out which app shortcut you want. I do wonder, and we can talk about shortcuts a little bit more down the line, but I do wonder, one of the things that nags at me about shortcuts is whether the future of shortcuts is not the Shortcuts app. The future of shortcuts is app shortcuts. I personally would like to see those two things live side by side. I think they serve different purposes and are both valuable, but we've seen an awful lot more of this stripped down version of automation on iOS in the last 2 years, I guess, than we have in the past. And that does concern me a little bit.
I personally would also prefer if that was the case, but I think the future is either two things. It's either app shortcuts or the Shortcuts app we think about, but not with the editor UI we like, but something more like creating shortcuts with natural language using Siri and a large language model.
Yeah, no, and that's possible. And who knows what that looks like. And maybe we'll like it when we see it. But it is one of those things that I think about quite a bit. I do want to talk about Lookup with you just a little bit because you had some great examples in your review of one of the new features of Lookup. Now, Lookup can do a lot of things that are very useful. It can read the tags on your clothing to let you know how to wash and dry your clothes, which you had some examples of that. And it can tell you what the symbols on your dashboard mean when a light comes on your dash and says something's wrong with your car. But it can also identify meals that you eat. And it is much better at incredibly simple meals. I'll tell you the one that I did last night, actually, as I was working on the macOS review. I found a picture in my photo library of a bowl of cut up watermelon. It's really not a dish. I mean, it's just a cut up watermelon. And it correctly identified it for me and gave me a when I tapped on the icon, it gave me a suggestion for a recipe on how to cut up a watermelon. Not something I really need a recipe for, but it's there. It'll identify things like a hamburger quite well, or a pizza. But you had some very specific Italian cuisine that you tried with it that came up with some very hilarious results.
Yeah, some pretty hilarious results. One of them, when it showed me, I believe it was a picture of pasta that I had in Sardinia, and it categorized that pasta as a TikTok viral sensation. That killed me. I was like, no.
I bet it did.
No, why boil it down to a TikTok viral video? Yeah, so that obviously needs work, but also I understand, regional Italian cuisine, that's really testing the algorithm there, the artificial intelligence there. And maybe the AI will never be able to properly categorize this very specific regional dish that you get in a remote place on an island off the coast of Italy. I understand, but still, some of those results were pretty bad for me.
Right. Once you start introducing multiple ingredients and sauces and other things that kind of make it hard to distinguish one thing from another in a dish, that's when it starts to really coming up with funny results. I guess we should maybe wrap up this section, Federico, talking about the keyboard, because who would have thought? We're not talking today about the phone app, but shocker, there's actually a new phone app, or a revised phone app for iOS 17. But just as kind of unexpected, I think, in a lot of ways, is that the keyboard has been changed quite a bit, and it's really a couple of things that I think are most surprising and interesting, which are auto completion of words and even phrases, as well as autocorrection. How's your experience been with those two things?
It's been terrific, and it is alongside Standby, I think, and widgets, obviously. Perhaps my favorite iOS feature, just how much the autocorrect system, based on this new transformer model, has improved in iOS 17. Now, that new autocorrect with the transformer model, it only works in English, French, and Spanish, I believe. So it's coming later for other languages, but wow, it's so good. Like the predictions, it feels like I'm not fighting against the keyboard anymore. And it feels like the keyboard is actually good at suggesting words that I want to type, entire sentences that I want to type. Like it's got multi-word suggestions and completions. You can just press the space bar now to accept a suggested word. You can go back and edit a suggestion. And if you do, it's gonna learn from your corrections. Apple specifically calls out in their all features page explicit language. Now the keyboard can learn from you. If you use explicit language, it's gonna learn. So yeah, all of those typos, it's gonna learn whether you want to use explicit language or not. And just it feels so much better again to use the software keyboard, to the point where entire sections of the review I typed with the iPad software keyboard just by using touch.
I'm amazed at that. I know you're trying to be nice and quiet so Sylvia can sleep at night, but boy, that is that I just can't type on that software keyboard, even though it maybe I should try now though, with all the changes. Maybe I would have better results. The other thing about the keyboard, Federico, is that I think people are going to feel very quickly that any app that doesn't use a standard text field feels broken. This is true on the Mac too, because, and it's interesting. This is maybe a nudge away from web-based apps in a way by Apple, because if you're an Obsidian, this isn't going to work. It's only going to work in apps like Notes or Mail or anything that has, a native text field. It'll work in there, but you'll find there are apps, Notion is another one, where this just isn't going to work. And it feels broken very quickly once you start relying on the autocomplete and the correction abilities.
All right. So with the intelligence stuff, I think we really are on the cusp of something not necessarily new, but bigger and more intelligent than before. And I think this is one of those things that is an up and coming trend. And I think we're only going to start seeing more and more of these iOS functionalities by Apple. But the thing that I also wanted to to point out at the end of this segment that I also mentioned in my review is that for all the talk there is about ChatGPT and all these other modern spin on chatbots, the thing about Apple's approach to intelligence is maybe it's not as flashy as asking ChatGPT to, pretend you're I don't know, Barack Obama and give me a speech about, Super Mario. Like maybe it's not, obviously Siri doesn't do generative AI, but I think Apple has a very practical approach that tries to reach people for what they do on their devices, to try and being helpful for very practical things. So it's like, creating a calendar event with natural language, or finding the subject of a photo, or having a better keyboard for the things you type every day. It's a more pragmatic approach that doesn't maybe get them a lot of headlines, but that I think applied to the things you do every day on a computer is more beneficial to people, despite the flashiness of ChatGPT. But this pragmatic approach makes you enjoy using the computer more.
Yeah, I think that that's an important point. I'm glad you raised it on the show today, because this is something I wrote about early in the summer for the club, that I really do feel like, they've got Apple may not be creating a chatbot, and maybe we'll see Siri get some of this and it'll become kind of a sort of chatbot, but AI is really deeply embedded in an awful lot of what the company is doing. But as you said, it's more like behind the scenes, under the hood, and practical. And, a lot of it works really, really quite well.
Yeah.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Electric. When leading your small business, it's not all glamour. In fact, sometimes it's a matter of spending hours onboarding a new employee, which you're well equipped to deal with, but maybe you don't have the time. The team at Electric knows small businesses, maybe like yours, that face these sorts of challenges. That's why they're on hand to help with time-consuming parts of your business, like standardizing device security with best-in-class device management software so you can implement best practices across the board and be ready to scale, and employee onboarding and offboarding done for you, saving you an average of 8 hours per request. Plus, Electric will help you keep a single point of visibility into your IT environment to control your devices, networks, and applications, while simplified reporting allows you to achieve and maintain compliance, and proactive IT recommendations and automated workflows make IT easy to manage for even non-technical users. And look, if you're hearing this and you think your company could use some of these services, but you're not sure where to start, Electric's experts will guide you through the process of establishing standardized IT processes for your organization. Keeping on top of these things as your business grows is really important. And you know what? When you started your business, you probably didn't think that you were going to have to be an IT expert, or that you would be onboarding or offboarding employees. And that's where Electric comes in, because they're experts at this and they can really help make this a lot simpler, saving you time and letting you get on with the core aspects of running your business. For App Stories listeners, Electric is offering a free pair of Beats Solo 3 headphones for taking a qualified meeting. Just go to electric.ai/appstories. That's electric.ai/appstories. Go there now to get your free pair of Beats Solo 3 headphones today for scheduling a qualified meeting. Our thanks to Electric for their support of the show. All right, Federico, I think, we've talked a lot about the things we like in iOS and iPadOS 17, but, it's not all roses and rainbows here. I mean, there are some disappointments. And as you read the review, I'm sure you'll see where Federico has criticisms. I mean, I know he's got some wishes for things like reminders and notes and a bunch of other aspects of both operating systems. But I wanted to talk about some of the bigger disappointments and what you had hoped for this year that maybe you didn't see, or maybe just doesn't work the way that you had hoped it would.
Yeah, I think unfortunately what we are seeing is a continuation of a trend that we've been spotting for the past couple of years, that we have mentioned over the past couple of years on MacStories and here on the show. And that is Apple's work on shortcuts for the past 2 years, it feels like something has changed. And the sort of how Apple updates shortcuts always tends to be about simple actions for toggling settings, opening screens, like these very basic actions for system apps and system integrations and system settings. And there's very little, and I mean, I want to say there's nothing for power users in shortcuts this year. And, we had so many hopes when shortcuts came to the Mac. And in hindsight, you were right, because you published a story, I believe it was last year. You published a story where you argued that you were concerned that Apple was using those macOS shortcuts integrations for things like the terminal and AppleScript, like a crutch, like an excuse to say, well, if you're a power user, you can fall back onto these existing solutions in shortcuts. Whereas we've been arguing for shortcuts native ways to automate Windows, file management, scripting complex things together with visual actions. And so in hindsight, your concern was not misplaced, like some people said at the time. You were right. And we're seeing that come true once again, unfortunately, in iOS and iPadOS 17. And I believe the same is true in Sonoma. There's very little for power users in terms of actions. There is an upside this year. In fact, I want to say the only good thing about shortcuts this year is the much improved automation flow.
Right.
The fact that all triggers for personal automations can be support background execution without user confirmation. So things like connecting or disconnecting to and from Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, location, time of day, all of those automations can now run without confirmation. And that's great. And Apple also improved how you can put together automations. It's easier to get started. You don't need to choose an empty shortcut anymore. You can just pick up an existing shortcut from your library or an app shortcut. So there are some good things about shortcuts automation this year. But I continue to be concerned about two things: the lack of new actions, the lack of, and related to that, the lack of changes to the editor, like how power users, how the more advanced users, those who evangelize shortcuts, can put together more complex workflows in the app. And the second is the stability and performance of it. It was always kind of bad, but it's getting worse to the point where there are some actual design regressions as well this year that I point out in my review. And I just find it so, I don't know what to think, because I love shortcuts. I think the way I described it in the first sentence of the chapter was, shortcuts continues to be the Apple app with the most potential, with the most technical problems and bugs. And I really do feel like if shortcuts was made by a third-party developer, we would absolutely destroy its design issues and performance issues in blog posts, in YouTube channels, in podcasts. But because it's made by Apple and it's integrated with the system and it uses private APIs and we love it and we've always loved it, we often, myself included, give it a pass. And that's not right. Because this app, if reminders or Safari, if messages had the mail, if these core apps had the design problems and technical issues and crashes of the Shortcuts app, it would be a whole mess on Apple websites.
Right.
And so that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right. The problems with shortcuts are of a different kind and magnitude than they are with any other app bugs that you point out in your review. And so I think it's right to kind of call them out on that. And I'm not going to pile on. I feel very much the same as you do about this issue. And as much as I'm happy like you are about things like personal automations and the way those are working with the new OSs, we still don't have those on Sonoma. So my enthusiasm for those is tempered quite a bit by what's going on the Mac side of things. But, we'll see, I guess.
Yeah.
At this point, I'm probably less optimistic about shortcuts than I've ever been, really. And that's a shame, really.
Yes. And I agree that it's right to be excited about the new automation changes. But you can make personal automations better on an annual basis so much, because at the end, if you don't do any new actions, what is there to automate? You know,
Right.
like you can make the system and the triggers better, you can make the flow better, but at some point you gotta give me some new stuff to automate, because I can only go so far with the triggers and conditions.
Right. Opening the selfie camera is only going to get you so far.
Exactly. So we'll see. But it's they're making it hard for me to continue absolutely loving and going crazy over the new possibilities in shortcuts. But we'll see.
And in hindsight, I think a lot of those setting type things that you're seeing as the new actions, those are driven probably by the action button on the Pro phones more than anything else, is my guess. And that's a different motivation, I think, for actions than actually letting power users create multi-step workflows.
Yeah.
All right, Federico, enough of the negative talk. I want to wrap up today and talk a little bit about your conclusion about this, because this was an interesting year.
Spoiler alert. We're going to talk about the conclusion.
This is the spoiler alert, but this is an interesting year for all the OSs, because Apple is busy working on Vision OS and the Vision Pro, and both the iOS, iPadOS, and macOS Sonoma, for that matter, are very much, as you've said before, a grab bag of features. There's a lot of great stuff in there, but the kind of overarching long-term narrative that we've had on some of these platforms in past years just isn't there in the same way. But I think your conclusion does a really nice job of kind of explaining a little bit about what the future of apps are on iOS and iPadOS.
Yeah, so there was this idea that I had in my brain somewhere ever since WWDC that I saved in my notes, and there was this concept, this thought that I saved and that I used for the conclusion. And that thought being that I feel like this initiative of widgets everywhere this year, from iOS all the way down to watchOS, really the only platform missing is tvOS for widgets at this point. Widgets everywhere, and interactive in a bunch of places. I think it's pointing in this direction of the very concept of the app changing. Because these interactions, this sort of turning apps into this sort of a la carte components, right? You can have a tiny bit of functionality from reminders here, a playback control from music there. You can have a Widgetsmith music thing, and you can have a Widgetsmith calendar thing. And at some point, you start interacting with these apps. You keep them on your home screen. And suddenly, these widgets become your primary interactions with those apps. Sometimes you also open the full app, obviously, because you need to manage your calendar or you need to manage your tasks. But some of the core basic interactions that you perform dozens of times every day are contained within the widget. And if you think about it, apps becoming so flexible, right? Apps offering widgets, Siri integrations, shortcuts actions, integration with focus filters, integration with standby. When you think about it, a modern app for an Apple platform is really this modular experience. And you know me, I love the concept of modularity. I love it in hardware and I love it in software. And I think we're now seeing this new kind of software modularity where it used to be that the app for the iPhone was the app that you got from the App Store. It landed on your home screen as an icon, and that was it. That was just the icon. And eventually we started getting the share sheet, and then Siri Kit, and then shortcuts, widgets, lock screen. Now apps have all these ramifications, all these components that you interact with on a daily basis. And I feel like that's the future. That to me, it clearly feels like the direction that Apple is going is this sort of twofold strategy where there's a unified ecosystem, developers make an app and it runs everywhere. This is not a new concept. Mm-hmm. We talked about it before. Now even the Vision Pro is going to run iPad apps. But there's this other part of the strategy which is interacting with an app doesn't necessarily mean launching its icon anymore. It means talking to it via Siri, creating a workflow with shortcuts, or using it via a widget. So I feel like this is the emerging theme that we need to pay attention to. And at the end of it all, I was left with this question, which is the thing I saved back in June, when apps are so modular and have so many different components, what does it even mean to be an app anymore on iOS? And I don't have a clear answer, which is why the review ends with an open question. And I guess we'll see next year, because I guess we'll probably start getting some answers next year. Because once the app, and now I'm speculating, once an app becomes a conversation that you can have with your assistant, right? Once an app becomes part of a longer plain language string of commands, well, that's a different experience altogether, right?
And once it becomes part of your environment, right? As you're in Vision OS, absolutely. I think, from my perspective, two things I want to mention about your conclusion. The first one is my Galaxy brain moment on this was thinking of widgets as shortcuts, because when you squint your eyes and everything's a little bit fuzzy, they really are the same thing. And in part, that's, I think, what makes me nervous about the future of shortcuts, because I think widgets are a more friendly a way of automating and accessing functionality in apps because they have a UI associated with them. You and I have talked many times about being able to build UIs with shortcuts. And in a way, Apple has said, sure, that's a good idea, but not with shortcuts. We're going to do it with widgets. The other thing about your conclusion, the thing that I love about the question, is that it really echoes for me the what is a computer question, just in a different context altogether, which is apps. And I think it's a question we're going to be talking about a lot and trying to answer for years to come at this point.
Yeah. And the other thing that I also mentioned in the conclusion, and I want to leave our listeners with this, pay attention to what Apple is doing with the app intents framework, because I've been reviewing iOS and iPadOS iOS for almost a decade at this point, which is wild to think about. I started with iOS 9 in 2015, so next year it'll be 9 years.
Wow.
And I've never seen a technology like app intents. Maybe at some point NS user activity was similar to that, but app intents is really going far beyond the user activity framework. This technology that started out as a way for users to integrate apps with Siri and eventually became the foundation of shortcuts, and intents became the very technology that developers use to create programmable actions in shortcuts for their apps. And now intents, the reason why John said when you squint, a widget is really a shortcut, the actions that you can perform in widgets this year, those buttons, they are based on intents. And developers can program those buttons with the same technology that they can use to program an action for their apps in the Shortcut app. So when you think about it, a widget really is a visual version of a shortcut, right? It's a tiny piece of UI that talks out of process with an app that is not in the foreground, and it does something and it returns something. So let's pay attention, I would say, to wrap it all up. The technical takeaway, I guess, from this review is, let's pay attention, whether you're a developer or a user who's interested in following the evolution of Apple software. Pay attention to app intents, because I strongly feel like this technology will continue to be used by Apple in a lot of places. And if the rumors are true, and Siri is getting some conversational capabilities next year that are based on a large language model, and if creating a shortcut will turn from having an automator-like UI into, just say a bunch of things with your voice and you will make a shortcut. And I bet that app intents will play a fundamental role in that story. So the takeaway is this: let's pay attention to this technology, because Apple is investing heavily on it, and it's gonna be a fascinating ride, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, that's a great place to stop for today, Federico. Again, I want to congratulate you on the review. I know how much work it is for you every year, and you sacrifice a lot of your family time and other things to get it done. And but it really shows. The hard work shows, and I really encourage everybody to grab it and start reading, because it's a great read. It's entertaining as well as informative. So enjoy it over the rest of the course of the week. I also want to thank our very special sponsor for Federico's review. That's SetApp. as well as our other sponsors for this episode, Things, Daylight, HelloFresh, and Electric. You can find the two of us over at MacStories.net. Federico and I are both over on Mastodon. Just go to vitici.macstories.net or johnvorhees.macstories.net to follow us on Mastodon. And we're on Instagram, where Federico is at Vitici. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.